now we're going to kick off the investor panel. So this is a new addition this year. We're excited to bring you individuals from the ag tech ecosystem, including a founder, an angel investor, and 2 venture capitalists, one of which was a previous founder with an exit. We hope this discussion captures the different levels of perspective in the ag tech innovation world. And to start out, I want to introduce our moderator, Kevin Kimle, the Rastetter Chair of Agricultural Entrepreneurship at Iowa State University. So Kevin is a teaching professor at Iowa State and director of Start Something Agriculture Program. In addition to his academic role, Kevin is also the author of an upcoming book and podcast, The Entrepreneur's Ethic. This underscores his commitment to not only educating future generations of the agricultural entrepreneurs, but also to providing practical guidance to those looking to launch and grow their businesses in this field. So I'm going to let Kevin take it away and do intros for everybody else.
All right, thank you, Jordan, and thank you to all of you. Just a brief thank you. Ag Ventures Alliance, since I started running the agricultural entrepreneurship program at Iowa State University, has been a great supporter of everything that we do. And I have to reflect also, just seeing the founders that are here and this organization. I started my first ag tech company in 1996 and got a lot of help, most certainly. But I could have only dreamt at that point to have been at an event like today, surrounded by people working to build businesses and to support those that are doing it. So this is just entirely cool, and we really appreciate it. So I'll do just brief intros of everybody that's up here, and as I ask you all questions where I miss it or mess it up, let me know. I won't go into university affiliations here, but we have degrees represented, if I read everybody's bios right, from the University of Kansas. Kansas State University, University of Nebraska, and Iowa State University, the one school still in March Madness and represented in the Sweet 16. But hey, who wants to brag about the whole thing? All right, so we have Joe Rowe, who is a farmer, a member of Ag Ventures Alliance, and an investor on the side, an angel investor. So Joe, thank you for being with us. We have Ben Williamson. He's a seed stage venture capital investor in Nebraska startups through the Invest Nebraska organization and Midwest Ag Tech startups through Grit Road Partners. Ben has a background in mentoring and investing for a long time with startups, in addition to a law degree that I think occasionally has some usefulness in this space as well. Jared Westfall is with us. So he is Chief Strategy Officer for Innovative Livestock Services. ILS produces beef in Kansas. He scouts for and deploys ILS capital to outside companies with solutions that complement their core cattle feeding business and farming operations. Previously, Jared was co-founder and CFO with AgriSync, another ag tech startup that sold eventually to Deere. And Jared, you too have a background as an attorney that may be useful occasionally in what you do. And we have Chad Johnson, who is CEO and co-founder of Grainweevil, who we met a little bit earlier, an Omaha-based grain bin safety business that has a management robot that he spoke about. He has a background in education and education technologies. So first, I wanted to start with just a question to all, so I can either just pass the microphone down or if somebody wants to get us started. I wanted to start just by asking, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about building successful ag tech businesses and investing in them? You know, if we try to set some context for today, I don't know when ag tech came to be called ag tech, but most certainly when Monsanto in 2013 bought an ag tech company called Climate Corp for just over $1 billion, it captured the imagination of lots of people with money to invest, and the amount of money deployed into ag tech businesses went up pretty rapidly. But I think about sort of where we're at today, and it's sort of best of times, worst of times. A lot of capital's been deployed into ag tech, into companies that just haven't worked out well, but I feel like at the same time, what we've been trying to do in the Midwest is build companies maybe the old-fashioned frugal way, and at least at certain times I think that seems to be working in developing kind of our own important path. But I think it's important to, start out with any misconceptions for our audience and what you think people misunderstand, whether it be people right here in the Midwest or people from maybe outside of what we consider traditional agriculture. Who would like to get us started?
I guess just to extrapolate out that context a little bit, I think the first misconception is one that we maybe don't hold in this room, but as Kevin indicated, it's one that's been around since 2005, 2010, which is that you can't build interesting tech companies in Iowa and Nebraska and Kansas and Indiana. You have to build them in traditional venture capital hubs. I actually hate the word venture capitalist in the ag tech space because I think it makes a lot of particularly ag producers and people in this industry sort of pucker up. And so that's the first thing is I think all of us up here on this stage fundamentally believe, and I think many of you, that you can build interesting ag tech companies. You can do it right here, and you can do it with entrepreneurs that actually understand agriculture, that actually understand the problems being faced on the front lines. And the result of that, hopefully, is that these companies don't fail for lack of adoption, like some of the peers that were previously created from the traditional venture capital hubs. So that's the first thing. The second I would say is another misconception, I think, is that you have to raise tons of equity capital to be successful. Again, that's this prevailing wisdom from the traditional venture capital hubs, is that you have to raise a bunch of money and that a proxy for success is successful fundraising. I think that is not how we build businesses in this part of the country. I think as Kevin indicated, it's better to build a fundamentally sound business that makes sense, that solves a real problem, and then raise capital when you see an opportunity to grow. I know that sounds like a crazy concept in investing in startups, but I think those are the two things that are the tailwinds for the four of us as we look at ag tech here in the Midwest. So those are two that I'd offer.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions on the funding cycles are we get compared to software startups that can, raise a bunch of cash and then have a 10x return in 2-3 years, and especially when we're talking about hardware in the Midwest, it's a much longer play. So I think it's being frugal with our burn rates, making sure that you don't try to go raise every 12 months. Those are the big pieces because it's a much longer development process in ag because the cycles. I mean, we only get a certain number of times to test during harvest, right? And so I think that's why I like our investment portfolio. Everybody understands that cycle. And I don't really want some investment from the East Coast that wants me to 10x our profit by exiting in 2 years. I want to make sure that we build a real opportunity, and it takes a long time. So I think that's the biggest challenge on my end.
I think, I think sometimes, again, with Ben's caveat, that's not prevalent here or even people in the middle part of the country, but sometimes there's a perception that the opportunity in ag tech is to innovate things that can help us just bypass the producer, or the producer that we have today and leapfrog to the better future version of production. And that's never going to work. Second of all, you're going to find the producers that will adopt a value-creating solution today. And by the way, those are the producers that are going to be in business tomorrow and the day after and transition us from whatever our production systems are to what they will become. It's not going to be a rip and replace the producers we have. It's going to be, as it has for decades and generations, it's going to be a sifting and sorting to the producers who figure out in a low margin environment doing what you do to get a little bit better, and do that through a combination of things that sometimes are innovation and sometimes are just working differently than we have. And coastal ag tech in particular sometimes is stuck in the mindset of not really understanding whatever we're doing in ag tech innovation and investing has to work through the producers that we have and the way those producers think, the way those producers adopt, and not always solve for how to work around them.
For myself, I think the misconception that I try to live by every day is not the one that my father saw. And what he saw was the death of agriculture. He didn't see a future on the farm. That's why he encouraged me to go down to Iowa State and didn't tell me he was getting out of farming until I moved to Iowa State. So I didn't do something silly and start farming. Well, fast forward 8 years and I did something silly. But I'm here. I've made the investments I've made because I believe in the future of agriculture. And this organization has proven that agriculture has a vibrant future. This organization with its history of what we have done, and we not being me, but the people before me here, and you know what you've built. You've built your future. We can have a stake in that, and part of that stake comes from investments in companies like these gentlemen have all out here. That's how we build and keep a vibrant future for ourselves, and that's the misconception that a lot of people feel the ag doesn't have a bright future. I disagree with that wholeheartedly.
Joe, I think that's a great point. I try to remind students as somebody who graduated from high school in 1989, and my dad actually encouraged me to farm, and I turned him down, but that wasn't what most parents were doing at the time. But to see today young people coming to Iowa State University, many of which who sit in my classroom, want to be involved in agriculture, some in farming, just to be involved in agriculture, but most don't have a clear path for how to do that. So, you're engaging your imagination, and that's part of what I encourage students to do. And we sort of deal with some of the realities that you all talked about. Chad mentioned hardware, right? Hardware is hard is the thing that we talk about. Seasonality of what we do, dealing with real things that we try to keep alive, and they try to die on us in all kinds of strange ways, right? How do we engage that imagination of people, whether it's prospective founders, whether it's students at Iowa State University, whether it's prospective investors who are farmers? How do we, is there a way that we do a better job inspiring people to get involved?
This is my job before I started this. So that education background that was on my resume there is, I was an elementary school teacher and then ran education programs all across the state of Nebraska to teach kids workforce skills through innovation. And I think part of the separation between, it's pretty easy to say, go into mechanical engineering, so join a robot program. It's easy to say, hey, there's a 10,000 manufacturing jobs available in the state of Nebraska. Go into advanced manufacturing. But the coolest part about it is it's super easy, especially when you got these robot programs in rural areas, these middle school, high school kids, even elementary school kids, they start to see, my company is here because of those programs. My son went through those programs to build robots, but then never thought once he'd ever go into ag, because no one ever said to him, this is what ag is the future of ag are these kids that are building electronics and software and new hardware and improvements. So I think the important part of all of this is that, the FFA programs are shifting. They have a lot of really good technology pieces in the FFA programs now, the competitive robots. There's all sorts of these kind of things that all of you can get involved in your local schools, your local communities. And that's what, it would shock most of those students to walk out on your farm and see the technology. And unless you start doing that, they're not going to see the opportunities. So opportunities come from exciting activities like these competitive robots and other things. So get involved in that, and you'll start to see a much higher flow of these really talented kids coming into these areas. Maybe, like my son says, I didn't go into ag. I went in to build robots. It just so happens that ag is a perfect opportunity for robots. And I think you're going to find a lot of that as well.
So I think the punchline is what Chad said, which is like, just try stuff, get your hands dirty, go build and tinker. One sort of point I want to make on that is this sort of graveyard of ag tech companies that Kevin hinted at in the intro here. A lot, and this is my opinion, but I think a lot of the reason they failed is they started with the technology first. They looked at ag as this industry that was ripe for disruption, right? They looked around and they saw ubiquitous technology in other industries and just said, oh, well, we can just apply that to ag and disrupt, right? And they did that backwards. And so what I think we're seeing now, particularly in the Midwest with entrepreneurs, is, again, starting with a problem, understanding the ag value chain, understanding margin constraints, understanding all of these things, and then bringing technology to solve those problems. But it starts with that knowledge of the problems in agriculture, but then I think you have to go out and look at technology outside of agriculture and think about how you can apply it. There's a good example of a founder in Nebraska that's an ag kid from the southeast part of the state, grew up his life on a farm and has always done stuff in ag, went out and got his MBA at Stanford with one goal: to learn about cool technology, bring it back to the Midwest, and build an ag tech company. So he had that foundational knowledge. He went out and taught himself, coding and machine learning and all of the things, and brought it back. And I think he could have started an ag tech startup 2 years ago here in Nebraska, and it wouldn't have been nearly as prime for success if he went to got out into the world and sort of exposed himself to the technology side. So I think it is exposure. I think it's getting hands-on. But I think we have to be careful in what order we do that in ag tech, because if we do it in the reverse order, it's historically failed.
We here sitting in this room have the ability to make an impact. This past Sunday, a neighbor farmer hosted in his shop for 3 hours, brought in the lead mechanic out of a large excavating company, and they had 5 kids from the age of 11 to 14 that have never picked up a welder before. And those 5 kids' eyes were open in those 3 hours, and they started welding. Simple things like that. And I've seen that spark in my middle son's eye. Take the oldest son, bought a drone. I don't know how to pilot the thing, but we got one. We're going to try it out. I'm making him get his Part 107 license. Why? Because in my eye, that 107 license for a drone is like having a CDL for those of us in the past. It's an insurance policy. It's the future. You got to have that license, and that is going to open up multiple doors for you. We can each have an impact like that for that next generation.
Well, I'm going to ask each of these individuals a little different question, but also I want to prime you all to ask questions. So I'll open it up, and I'm sure we can find plenty of things to talk about, but I'd like to invite your questions, comments, whatever, as we go on into this as well. So just a brief monologue here to try to set the stage. Michaela Mooney and I participated in a group and a program at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, over the last couple of years. And it's more of an international-based program, but there were 4 Midwest teams, one from Nebraska, one from Iowa, one from Kansas City, and one from St. Louis, over how to build entrepreneurial ecosystems. And one of their simple points that I think just totally makes sense is that to have a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem where companies are being started, companies are being built, revenues are growing, investors are making money. Anyway, all the healthy things is that you need lots of stakeholders involved. Of course, there has to be entrepreneurs. There has to be investors in those, especially higher risk but higher potential reward kind of companies. But then also universities need to play a constructive role. So that's one of the hats that I wear. Corporations, and maybe in agriculture, that really means kind of farmers as well, although corporates play a big role, but the private sector who's going to be using some of the solutions created has to participate. And then even the fifth leg of the stool, if you will, government, right? Everybody has to be pulling in the same direction to have a healthy ecosystem. And so I think always reflecting on kind of what it takes. So I thought I would start with Chad, and Chad, understanding you're in the room with your investors, thought I would ask you, what makes for a good investor? And maybe more provocatively, if we're willing to do that here in a room in Clear Lake, Iowa, what makes for a bad investor?
So I think probably the easiest answer to what makes a good investor is that investor isn't just a check. If all you're investing in Grain Weevil for is to make money, then that's a tough sell. But if you're in it for helping us solve problems and get to where we want to go, because there's so many things that, like, all of our investors, the strategies that we went about finding the bigger investors, the angel groups, all of the people that have invested in our company, we hope there's a reason beyond paychecks. And I think that's very important in ag. So to be a good investor, be willing to bring more, bring your experiences, your knowledge, be willing to come up and tell me, hey, I got a friend over here that has a suggestion for you. Those are the things. The more you can bring to the table outside of just a check, the better it is for a startup. So I think that's it. The bad investor, boy, I don't know. Other than just wanting profit, that's probably a tough one. But you know, ones that are constantly asking for my time, you know, for things that they're just appeasing their curiosity. You know, the startups have a lot to do, and hopefully, you know, you're more than welcome. Everybody in here will probably say, I mean, come to my robot shop. We would love to have you there anytime you want to come. But at some point, you've got those really, really, really needy investors that I feel like I have one. I won't tell you who it is because, you know, it seems like I spend a lot of time with that investor, and he gave me a $20,000 check, right? And yet he feels like he can occupy more time than all the rest of my investors. So I think that's kind of that balance, right? We want you involved, but we don't want you to, like, occupy our time for reasons for you. We want that time to be to develop our program and create. So it's a fine balance between being engaged and then being a time suck, right? Because we don't really have that much time. We don't have enough time. So I would say that you know, be more than a paycheck, but also don't be too annoying in the, I don't know how to describe that, but you guys all know what I mean, right? I'm sure all of our founders probably have that one person that seems to want to know things that don't seem that valuable in moving us forward.
Next video, Ben and Joe. Go ahead. Flip it around the other way. Well, it makes for a great founder and entrepreneur. Maybe or at least bad habit.
Well, I wrote a bigger than $20,000 check in Chad, so I'm glad to know that I'm not the pain in the ass. So first, I want to quickly answer Chad's question a little bit because the corollary helps me answer my question. So the first is, like Chad said, founders are going to find their money, right? Capital is a commodity. It still is a commodity when times are good and bad, and trying to add more value is important. The problem is it's actually not super easy to add value to startups, and I think a lot of people think they add value and almost no one does. So what I always say is there's 3 superpowers for early stage investors. So one is accessibility. Like, I want Chad to be able to text and call me every day. If I'm seeing him quarterly at board meetings, I've already messed up this relationship, right? So that's first and most important, accessibility. Second is relatability and transparency. So it's just being able to have real conversations as a friend, as a coach, as whatever. And then lastly is being honest with what I think. And this goes for especially producer investors in the room, like giving real feedback to the entrepreneur. Too many people are Midwest nice and don't say what they actually think. And that's really detrimental to founders. So just to start there, the corollary of that is one of the things, there's 4 things that I say make for a good founder. One of them is the reverse of that, which is sort of intellectual honesty and transparency on the founder side. So again, if I'm going to be accessible and relatable and transparent, like I need the same thing from you. If I'm only seeing your updates, either quarterly or monthly, and only hearing that things are amazing until you need another check, you're probably not going to get another check, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is sort of 2 parts, but to me they're 2 sides of the same coin, which is sales ability and leadership. No matter what anyone says, your first job, and it'll be a job you always have as a founder, is to sell. You're selling employees to come work for you. You're selling co-founders to come work for you. You're selling investors, and hopefully, most importantly, selling to customers. And I think leadership, being a good leader as a founder, is related to that sales. There's a passion and a need to be able to lead people. So that's the second. I would say the third is having that passion to go out and build something and get people to run along with you. So it's related to the second. And the fourth, and the one that maybe surprises people, is you have to be really unreasonable to be a founder. Like actually, you have to be terribly unreasonable. Chad is a really unreasonable human. Chad thinks that every single person in the country that owns a grain bin will buy one of his robots. That's insane. That's unreasonable. But he has to be unreasonable to have the vision big enough to go to do what he's doing. And so those are, and of course there are things that are table stakes, right? Like a certain level of intelligence is table stakes. High character is table stakes. Like if you look back at companies that fail, a lot of them have flickers of sort of things that are low character or not above board. So those things are table stakes, but those four are the things that we look for. And then of course bad founders don't have those things, or maybe they have the opposite of those things. So that's what I would say.
One more I would add is a consistent interest and willingness to learn. Because especially for first-time founders, they have no clue what they're getting into. And when you as an investor bet on them, it's mostly about betting on their ability to see what's happening and make adjustments and keep going. And a lot of that kind of distills back into an interest in willingness to learn, be coachable, et cetera. I would add on to Ben's comments on what makes a good founder.
Jared, you've been on both sides of the table. Inevitably, investor-founder relationship, there's going to be rocky road.
Yeah. Yeah.
Part of it,
Yeah. What are the good ingredients for a really, so you've heard from both sides. Now, what makes the harmony in the middle? The accessibility is right. I think as an investor, you've got to especially if you are an angel or an early check investor, you've got to realize you need to be available. You need to be helpful, but it's not your job to force yourself into the situation. And if you've picked a founder or a founding team who doesn't look like they know how to access and use what you can bring, remind them that you think you can bring some things, but don't demand that you be, for example, joining the weekly or monthly leadership team huddle on operational stuff. Don't do that as an investor. That's never going to be a good outcome. If you have that itch as an investor, go start your own business, or go take that energy and put it back into whatever business you're already a part of. That'd be my coaching. Don't try to live vicariously as a founder when all you really are is an investor. Other things that make a good investor-founder relationship, radical honesty around expectations right up front, and radical recognition that this is a risk-taking thing for everyone involved, and we are going to absolutely do the best we can. You got to check the basic box on character and ethic. If those can't be checked, then you might as well light your check on fire and just move on to the next things. But assuming you can check those boxes around ethics and character of the people involved on both sides, investor and founder operator, then you just got to be radically transparent and honest with each other that this is a high-risk thing we're going to go try to do, but here is our mutually shared why we think it's a risk worth taking. With the founder's time and capital, with the investors, mostly capital, and what it does to do things like show a vote of confidence in the future of production agriculture, or show a vote of confidence in an area or a region's economic prospects and so on. So that radical transparency and communication around expectations up front, I think, is essential. If you are a first-time investor or a first-time founder, it's it's exciting to feel validation early on when people are nodding, saying, yeah, I like what you're working on. Yeah, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I'd be interested in investing. Not every yes is the right fit for you. And so continue as a founder to be very critical and scrutinizing, and it's particularly hard in fundraising environments like the one we've been in recently, to maintain that discipline, to filter hard for the right type of investor, but I think you got to keep doing that. And then finally, part of maybe a build off of the expectations, radical transparency, again, for folks who are in it for the first or second time, there are only so many billion-dollar opportunities. One in ag tech in the last ever. If this is a $50 million or $100 million opportunity on the outside, right? If it's a 20 to 50, most realistically, okay, right? Dream big, inject a dose of reality both from the investor and the founder's perspective, and realize that doing early stage investing is a lot different than getting the next crop in and bringing the next crop out and doing your per acre profitability analysis at the end of every year. It's a totally different way to think about putting money to work. And sometimes we fall in love with, as investors, the big shiny headline, especially from the compelling founder who can really do a great job casting a big vision. It's okay to dial that back down and have more realistic expectations about what is the real size of this thing we're doing together. And if you're early in those discussions, early in setting those expectations, clear in the mutual dialogue about that, you set yourself up for a really good founder-investor relationship over the life of the business. And if you're one of the 2 or 3 or out of 10 that turns into something, great. And if you're one in the other bucket, then everybody's disappointed, but understood that was a possibility going into it.
I guess the only thing I really got to add is, as an investor, as an angel investor, this organization and the team, what Jordan and Spencer do is help me filter out. There's a lot of really great minds with really great ideas. I just happen to have a lot of really great bad ideas. Just because you have got a really great idea doesn't mean that yourself as a founder is going to bring it all the way to an exit or full viability. And that's something I've learned from Spencer and Jordan, and I see that they're doing for us as an organization is they're helping to filter that out. And Margaret and her group down in Tennessee is doing the same thing through the coaching and also helping filter and find not only just that great idea, but help see who might have the pathway and the vision and the resources or the team to take that all the way to the end.
Yeah, Joe, I've tried to put myself in the shoes of being a farmer and looking at this investing space, and every farm is different. Every farmer approaches things differently, but I think generalizing at least, you don't, when you're implementing new things into the farm, usually go all in right away without testing it out, right? I mean, there tends to be kind of a testing approach. See what works, learn, move on. Some things work, some things don't. When as a potential farmer investor, you're looking at something, you're usually going to be looking at a founder who has to, by necessity, be all in. Like, I'm either going to make this work or it's going to die. So I view that as sort of one of the challenges. What else do you think is sort of a challenge in relating to the ideas that you see? So being a part of Ag Ventures and Ag Launch helps you filter some of the ideas, but what else do you think is helpful for you to relate to what makes sense for you to invest in, and maybe what makes sense for you to test and try?
And I think that's the biggest power of our group. We're seeing things and we can see, yes, I can see that working on my farm. The first investment opportunity I took was with Clear Flame. I work in an ethanol industry as a merchandiser during the day. I grow corn that I deliver to that plant at night and weekends. And you look towards the future, the ethanol revolution, which Ag Ventures helped with years back, has matured. Something like Clear Flame and the ability to replace diesel fuel with ethanol could be that next plateau. So I've seen that as a viable future for the corn I grow. I see that as a viable solution for something like, anyone here enjoy adding DEF to a diesel engine? Probably not. It's a solution to that problem. It's a huge expense. It's a huge cost. If we're going to decarbonize stuff, we can do that with low carbon corn we produce. So being able to relate to an investment opportunity and see how that would fit in my own operation gives me more confidence. It gives me more understanding. There's probably lots of other places where you could find startup companies to invest in, but this is one where we're looking at ones that can relate. The hard thing for me is I'm seeing stuff that's outside of my wheelhouse, which is really exciting. But you know, when we have groups like I think it's Helly out in Washington or Oregon with the grasses and stuff, and on corn, soybeans, and maybe some corn, it just really opens your eyes. But they're seeing there's technologies that apply their fruits and vineyards. And that really opens our eyes talking with, or being able to access and see other parts of agriculture across the country besides our own backyard.
Well, let me open it up and see if there are any questions from the audience. If you think this professor is asking some bad questions or I've left something out, now is your opportunity. Yes, sir. Okay. So the question is, are there psychometrics for what makes for a good founder? Okay, I'll add a little bit.
Yeah, you go first. No, you go first. You're the professor. Please.
I'm the professor. There are personality tests that more have charted, more looked in a post like founding, like what personality traits do founders tend to have, but it's more correlation, not causation, if that makes sense. And so one of the prominent personality tests is called the Big Five personality test. 3 of the 5 traits are most associated with entrepreneurs. The first is extroversion. So the more extroverted somebody is, the more likely they are to be a founder. And I think sales ability, Ben talked about, right? And that doesn't mean an introvert can't start a business, but that probably means there needs to be a co-founder or a co-founding team that has extroversion. Number 2 is openness to experience. That's kind of the creativity element of a personality and being open to new ideas, if you will. And what's interesting is when I've given this test to students in my entrepreneurship and agriculture tests, they're high on extroversion. It's like, well, okay, they're taking an entrepreneurship class. They are low in openness. And when you look at big data sets across the Midwest, and the upper Midwest in particular, same thing. We as a population tend to be lower on openness to experience. And then the last one that's negatively correlated is agreeableness. So the more disagreeable somebody is, the more independent-minded, unreasonable, the more likely they are to be an entrepreneur.
I don't have anything to add. That was good.
Just quickly, I would add, I think the personality tests are much more effective in looking at team composition. So as Kevin said, like finding co-founders that complement each other's skill sets and make sure the team has good role coverage and things like that. The problem with anything about pointing to are you a good founder or not is like just because you're a good founder doesn't mean it's going to be a successful outcome for investors, right? And so like one of the challenges that venture capitalists, angel investors, I think, get sucked into this trying to pattern match and look back at their portfolio and say what worked and what didn't work, and then apply that pattern going forward. And the problem with that is that's why the venture capital industry invested in MBAs from Stanford for 30 years, because they were pattern matching. Like, and that's all they knew. They thought that was the roadmap for success. And of course, we know that that has nothing to do with success. So like, pattern matching is, I think, a bit of a fool's errand. You should look back, like I said, be intellectually honest and say what worked, what didn't. But the reality is, I look back at the companies in our portfolio that have failed, I would invest in those founders again. Because they had all of the things we've talked about. They had all of these characteristics that I think make them good founders, but the market wasn't ready, or the adoption wasn't there, or there were headwinds from cycles in agriculture or whatever. So there's just so execution, and there's so many factors beyond the founder that I think it's hard. I've seen a lot of venture funds try to use personality tests as part of their diligence. I don't know that I've seen that be successful for that reason. There's just too many variables. It is really good at team composition. And I think that's important as investors, is that we look at founding teams and make sure that they have gaps covered and role coverage and things. So that's the only thing I'd add.
All right, got my thinker going. So when we look at an investment from our company directly into a startup, the first category of inquiry for us on the diligence is people. And in particular, it's whether you call them a founder or not. It's like, who's on the team already? And do they complement each other? And have they achieved something together before? And how are we sure? How do we know? Right? And then we kind of follow that trail. And folks who have shown an ability to do something as a team together in the past, there's a high chance of you are less likely for there to be, founder disharmony or leadership team disharmony as the reason for death at that point, because they will go through stuff together, right? And how well can they, and you can take all the tests you want, right? And those are good indicators, but if you've got actual data of examples of things they have done, that's gold. That's good stuff.
Let's grab one more question from the audience. Anyone else? That's all. All right, Tim, you got 5 seconds.
Okay. So how do we build resources? So networking at universities is a big indicator for founders in Silicon Valley. How do we build that ecosystem, either at the university level or at a startup engine type facility?
Yeah, how do we build ecosystem? I've got my ideas, but you all are doing.
I'll toss one out there. I'll close the loop on the early comment about the colleges that are represented up here. So the startup that I was a founder of, that Ag Ventures invested in, we sold, right? We were primarily a Des Moines-based, West Des Moines-based, Waukee-based team. I was remote in Manhattan most of the time, Manhattan, Kansas, home of K-State, for those who don't know that one. It's not the other place. We know that.
Keep them straight.
Yeah, we know which one's downriver. So I've seen K-State up close. I've seen Iowa State semi-close. We use a ton of resources out of the Ag EI program. We have great working relationships with the Ag Startup Engine team, with the Greater Des Moines partnership on publicly funded things. So I got to witness that firsthand as a founder, trying to get the first breath of oxygen for a startup. Manhattan, Kansas is kind of in its own little bubble geographically. It's not next to any big metro. It's 45 minutes from Topeka. It's a great land grant institution that has its own strengths, just like Iowa State is, just like UNL is, just like Champaign-Urbana, Purdue, right? My question is, each of these land grants has done a lot of things to kind of get themselves stood up on some entrepreneurial things. When is the right time for the land grants to, between themselves, do more together programmatically? I think I'd like to see that. Not just because I think K-State's not as far along as others, and they need the help. But I think K-State, right? When you think about wheat and beef as natural strengths for the Kansas region and K-State, those stand out. And different universities have their own versions of those things within the big bucket of agriculture.
Just 30 seconds because I know we're over, but Kevin briefly previewed this 5-stakeholder model earlier. And so I think a simple way to do it is look at any ecosystem and see if there's sort of a deficiency from one of those stakeholders. I'll pick on Nebraska since I think I might be one of the only folks from Nebraska in the room. For a long time, we didn't have the stakeholder from the ag industry. The producer in the big ag company wasn't really a participant in the ecosystem. And I think that was a big impediment. The university also wasn't great. And so now that those stakeholder groups are at the table and giving feedback, we've seen a massive boon in our ag tech ecosystem. We're about 5 years behind Iowa State and you guys. Kevin deserves a lot of credit for that. But what you all are doing is, I think, the answer. It's real producers that understand agriculture, getting involved as investors, as advisors, as people giving feedback. That's the biggest thing. I think ag tech broadly has lacked that for the last 15 years. Now we're starting to see the big institutional ag companies, the individual producers, the generational families getting involved in the conversation at the early stages, and I've seen a huge benefit from that. So to me, that's it. And then I think what Jared said, and I say this in Nebraska all the time, if Lincoln, Nebraska and Ames, Iowa view themselves as two separate ecosystems for ag tech, we've messed up. We have to do this as sort of a Midwest region if we want to lead the charge and be this global hub for ag tech, which I think a lot of us in this room do. And so it's this cohesive stakeholder model, but backed out, broadened out, not just, goes across county and state lines. So that was more than 30 seconds, sorry.
The only thing I got is a challenge or question for those of us Ag VA members in the room. If you are not already involved with Countryside Angels, have you made a $10,000 mistake in your life before noon someday? Yes. It happens. That said, if you could take that $10,000 and invest in something that might revolutionize your farming operation or the next generations, would that be worth doing? Get on the calls, listen in, and I am positive you will find some company there that you can relate to, you can see value in, and value for the future investing in.
And I'll just wrap up maybe with a little bit of a challenge to myself, but I think to all of us. And I was telling this story a little bit earlier. 3 years ago, I was asked for the first time to speak to a career seminar class for students at Iowa State University majoring in agricultural business. And so for those of you who haven't been at Iowa State, agricultural business people do a lot of things. They farm, they work at an ethanol plant as a merchandiser, but they tend to be our corporate job getters, kind of our properly adjusted students, if you would, out of any that are in the College of Agriculture. There's 85 students in the room, and I'm talking to them about entrepreneurship as a career alternative, since it is a different way to think about your career as opposed to working for a large corporate. I asked a question for the instructor to take attendance at the beginning, and the question was, I believe that at some point during my career, I will start a business or a farm. True or false? The electronic tally came up, 78% of the students in the class said true. Amy Brandow, who teaches that class, said, Kevin, that seems high. What do you think? I said, Amy, that is really high. Well, this is 3 years ago. I thought maybe post-pandemic, hangover. 2 years ago, I asked the same question. It went down. 75%. This last November, I asked the same question. It stayed the same, 75%. Now, what those students intend varies as much as you can have 100 students in the room, and it means, but I think the next generation varies. I showed that as a motivational tactic, that 78% to the entrepreneurship and agriculture class that I teach on the first day. One of the provocative students in this room said, what, Professor Kimle, happens if that's true? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, what if 78% of some part of the population all do their own business? And I said, well, the economist in me wants to say labor markets will have to bid up, right? You have to bid people out of doing their own thing. But I said it also means like large companies aren't feasible anymore. And he's like, is that bad? I said, Is it a worse world if like a Cargill isn't feasible? No, I think that's okay. I think it's a better world. So anyway, I invite you all to help us try to figure out for what we do as our part at Iowa State University, but it's got to be even beyond that for how we pull the next generation who I think has serious intentions of wanting to do things into the opportunities that we can ultimately create using our imaginations in agriculture. And let's give our panel a hand. Thank you, guys.